Russiagate. It's on the minds of a lot of people. When I first started hearing about this, I was pretty frustrated because it seems like there is something important happening with Epstein. And instead of getting revelations, we have the House adjourned. We have Mike Johnson doing ridiculous spaces on X where he is just repeating this propaganda. And I feel like the people that were running the X space with Mike Johnson, this is the first time we've ever had the Speaker of the House ever come on a big public forum like this. And I wanted to throw up in my mouth hearing this ridiculous set of questions that they're asking him and essentially just providing cover. Now we've got this story coming out with Tulsi Gabbard. And my first reaction to this is, why now? We've got this administration that came in. They could have released this information at any point, and yet here they are. Either this is something legitimate, but they're releasing it in the middle of this other thing that's going on, and it seems completely tone deaf, and it seems like a smokescreen. And if it isn't, how can they be so naive to not realize the optic that they're just throwing it into the mix of something that looks like they're trying to provide cover for Trump? Mike Johnson adjourning the House and then this coming out hot on the heels. To me, it's such bad optics for the administration, even if this is legitimate. And my first reaction to this is, I mean, this is de rigueur for presidents. I remember when President Bush said there's weapons of mass destruction and there weren't. I mean, this is just another in the litany of the government lying to the U.S. population, and we're finding out about it later. You got to tell me why this is important, Lucas, because to me, it's just more of the same stuff from everything that we see from U.S. government consistently.
Okay, why is this important? You've put out one way to read it, but that is expecting that's expecting a lot from a man who's not a king. And President Trump and the presidents of the United States, though we may levy that accusation against them, or some may levy that accusation against them, they're not a king. I think this is very important, and I know it's frustrating to see the information about Jeffrey Epstein and anyone who may have been involved with him stalled. But to me, this has been the brunt of the concern. This is the most important thing going into Trump's first term. It is a chip on his shoulder, a chip on America's shoulder that we have needed to bring to the table and to have a discussion. I think this is the most I think this is also directly related to the war in Russia and the wars in the Middle East. And I think that there is, when I see the interest and the fervor about Jeffrey Epstein, I say those who are more concerned about the implications of their actions that occurred in the first administration, during Obama's presidency, during GW's presidency, and especially during Biden's presidency, are coming home to have a come to Jesus, I guess, or whatever we're going to have. But to me, this is actually what's very important. And there have been new revelations, or at least affirmations of what people had assumed had occurred, that have come out with Tulsi Gabbard's press, her interviews with the press in the preceding 2 days. So this to me is incredibly important.
So to sum this up, the way I understand this, Obama said, cook this story up to provide cover for the release of the emails, which showed that Bernie was not going to be allowed to run in the primary. We know that the primaries have been cooked forever. We saw this happen again when Kennedy tried to run, when he tried to get the nomination. We've had the primaries for a lot of the political stuff be controlled by both sides of the party since 2008. I've known about this. What's the real story here is that the treason. Why is this treason thing being bandied about?
Okay, so you made an allusion to the Democratic National Convention in it was either in July or June of 2016, leading into the Democratic National Convention in 2016. Julian Assange published many emails of the DNC that had been leaked. And that is something that's very important here, because the narrative of the damage control that was put forth by the Democrats during the convention, because this leak occurred 3 days before, was that they had been hacked. And the person that they pointed to in order to stir up the American people, or the entity that they pointed to, was to Russia. And they thought they would capitalize on generating fears, blaming this on a hack rather than a leak, because then they could both delegitimize the information, because if they had been hacked, there was questions as to the veracity of that information. And secondly, if it was a bogeyman like Russia, that would begin to set up or direct attention to foreign policy rather than domestic policy, leading into the rest of that campaign. So it got deeper, and this was absolutely contrived. This was a suggestion put forth by Jake Sullivan in the day, maybe the day before or the day of the Democratic National Committee. Everybody go out, let's blame Russia. So spur of the moment decision to redirect the attention as to what was occurring in the Democratic National Convention, to take the narrative from Bernie Sanders, from Hillary, and to throw it onto Russia instead. So this got deeper in October, and in October, President Obama directed the CIA to produce a memo that said that the hack was Russia, and the accusations of the Democratic Party were true. Now, they were doing this under the expectation, and if you remember, at that time, everybody thought Hillary would win. It was a great surprise to the entire country when Donald Trump won. And we have, from the actual lips of the head of the FBI, and the head of the FBI is James Comey at this point, and don't forget the James Comey letter and that whole fiasco. The head of the CIA, John Brennan, the director of national intelligence, James Clapper, they were all complicit. This goes to the very top of the security apparatus of the United States, and it's very important because the revelations, and even by their own here in the future, of the cover-up that was perpetrated by politicians and by members of the intelligence community, is the most delegitimizing, the greatest the greatest this is the biggest revelation that we've had about our intelligence community in the history of the United States that I can think of. This far surpasses Watergate. This far surpasses, or maybe is approaching to on a par with weapons of mass destruction from the Bush era. But here we have it. I guess
the reason you're saying that, because that's pretty bold, is because of the ramifications of where this led to. You're saying that this actually really fostered the situation in Russia, leading to the war in Ukraine. Is that kind of how the chips falls? Like, this was the kickoff of the domino that led to all the rest of the downstream stuff that occurred? Is that why you're saying this is so important?
In one hand, yes. I guess there are two other things, though. One, it goes all the way to the president. So we never saw anything of the like pegged all the way to baby Bush with the weapons of mass destruction. But two, the most important part is because this led to what now we can understand as a failed coup attempt. And it also begins to bring into a very different light the presidency of Joe Biden and the complaints about the Republicans leading into Biden's election. So that the Obama administration and players who existed well into the Trump administration set up this narrative of Russiagate, and then the Democrats never backed down to it, and there was never a come to Jesus and a realization that this was all one grand hoax. And then when we layer on top of that, Grant, that this all centers around a memo that's produced by MI6 from England. And to go back to, as I say, you know, like when we ask ourselves, you know, what is the history of the United States? What is the history of our foreign relations? What are our relationships with various countries around the world going into World War I and coming out of World War II? Why is it that we have this special relationship with England, and how much trust is there in it, and whose interests are at stake, or whose interests are actually being borne out? They're not the United States. And so as we question our situation in the Middle East and question our relationships with Iran and with Russia, to know the truth about this, and also to understand that this goes back to the Steele dossier, and the Steele dossier was a fabricated memo that was put forth by MI6 and possibly, maybe probably, the pegging of the DNC leaks, the idea to peg that on Russia, maybe didn't come directly from the United States. Maybe that was something that was floated around or suggested, and that was planted in the minds of the Democrats. These are classic British tactics for creating chaos and continuing to manipulate their former colonies. So as we are faced with the wars that we have at hand here, to know the truth about what happened at this time is incredibly important. Am I making a good case for it?
Except you lost me on the Steele dossier, because I thought that this was kind of settled, that they were acquitted of this. What do you tell me more about what you're saying with the Steele dossier? Do we have new revelations on this? Because in 2022, I thought we kind of went through all of this stuff on the Steele dossier, and people were acquitted of lying. Did they get some kind of special deal? Did Tulsi Gabbard say something new about that?
Okay, I don't know where you're getting that anyone was acquitted with the Steele dossier. The Steele dossier was never from the release, and I believe, if I remember correctly, it was released by that up and coming. Now I can't even remember their name. The people that started the shitty headlines on the internet. The clickbait headlines. The Steele dossier was released even though it was never verified, and it had been passed around by members of the intelligence agency to all sorts of politicians. Nobody believed it at the time. The reason that the Steele dossier comes back into importance is because we also have learned that immediately after the election, Obama, so this goes again directly to the top, issued a directive to the director of national intelligence, to the I believe it was to the director of the CIA, John Brennan, to produce a memo that confirmed that the Russians had the Russians had influenced the election, and that Donald Trump had won because of Russian interference in the election. Now, let's go back to some revelations that were made by Tulsi Gabbard yesterday that tell us what the intelligence community actually thought at the time. One, they thought that the Steele dossier was unconfirmed, unsubstantiated, probably not true. Two, that the Russians did not have the capability to interfere with the American election, and two, that they did not, or three, that they did not have the inclination, or had not. There was no sign that they were planning on doing so, much less that they had done so, or had any success. Furthermore, the person that they actually had compromise on was Hillary. And so when Vladimir Putin was asked in the lead up to that election, I believe sometime around September, do you support Donald Trump, by some cheeky reporter, his response with a smug smile is, actually, Russia supports Hillary. And that was taken to be a joke by Putin at the time. But I've said before, the Russian politicians may mince their words and may twist the truth, but they never flat out lie. And so I think that we have an understanding there that Putin was saying to the members of the intelligence community, the members of our government, you know what we know, and what we know is that we have information on Hillary. And if she goes into office, then we would definitely hold that against her. So that was absolutely fascinating. But to fast forward again to October.
Wait, let's go to timing on this, because this is the one that sticks in my craw the hardest. Why now? Why wait until this point? Did Tulsi Gabbard have some new thing that she's suddenly been put into her hands, or is this something that they've had since the beginning of the administration? They could have released it at any point. The tone deaf part of it, the timing of this, right after Mike Johnson adjourns the House, says that they're providing cover for what is going on. And we have multiple different people in the Congress who are saying, this is what we're doing. We're trying to cover for the president. Why are they doing this now? Did she suddenly get access to something? Did suddenly something just get cleared? What is with the timing of this? It looks so bad.
The timing of this has everything to do with Ukraine and Russia, and nothing to do with Jeffrey Epstein, which again gives me pause to why all of a sudden the focus on Jeffrey Epstein and my reticence to jump on that bandwagon. Yes, I want to see the information about Jeffrey Epstein and those politicians released. But again, nuclear war ought to be what we're thinking about is at stake here. And our relationship with Russia, and also the end of the Russian conflict, and the possibility that Europe is going to be jumping in and trying to draw the United States through our NATO alliance into that conflict is what is of utmost importance. And so these revelations have everything to do with that timing and the conversation and the timeline that's been going on with regards to, in part, the wars in the Middle East, but mainly with the war in Ukraine. So Russia, I'm not sure how much you've been following what's going on in Ukraine right now, but Russia has amped up their attacks and is moving forward at a damning pace. And I think at the last exchange of casualties, of dead, the Ukrainians got 1,000 soldiers back, and Russia got 16 back. And Ukraine is beginning to fall. The United States. So what has happened in the last couple of weeks? Donald Trump called what's his name, the dullest tool in the shed from NATO, over to the Oval Office to tell him the United States still supports you. We're going to sell you weapons as long as you can come up with the money. And Europe has turned around and said, we don't have the money. We don't have the money. What are we going to do? And so now we have Germany and France saying, okay, well, finally the time has come to marshal troops and to send European soldiers into NATO, because that's all that we have left. And so the United States is preparing to fully withdraw, but they are going to have. Or I would imagine that Europe, NATO, is planning to try to call on the United States to marshal up the vast larger number of soldiers that we can produce to send in to Ukraine to fight that war. And so having this exposed and this to become part of the national narrative in the United States is crucial if we're going to lay out the reasons why we're not going to do it. And that the bugaboo of Russia as being our enemy number one is a contrivance and to turn that and put that on the shoulders of either Obama or Clapper or Brennan or whomever it may be is what we are going to see happen. And so if we're not to be drawn into NATO, then we need to be having this conversation about the truth of as to whether Russia has been meddling in our elections. If Russia wasn't meddling in our elections, and if we begin to understand who was meddling in whose elections, and that what the United States has done to provoke Russia, what NATO has done to provoke Russia since the 1990s, and especially since leading into 2014 and the NATO encroachment on Ukraine, which was Russia's red line. We need to understand that Russia has not been meddling in our elections, and Russia has refrained from releasing compromise on Hillary Clinton. This is why the timing. It has nothing to do with Epstein. Epstein is
and as far as what would come of this, we have precedents now set about presidential immunity for actions that were taken in office. Nothing can come of this to Obama, as far as the way that I understand this and read this. Like, they can cry treason all they want, but it's not like a previous president is going to be strung up for this. Do they have a target in mind? Like, what is the plan? Is it just to try to shut down this involvement of the U.S. via NATO into the Ukraine? Is it to try to quell that? Because you've posited that what Trump really wants to do is to try to draw home a lot of the foreign disbursement of U.S. troops that are throughout the world. And that's what he was doing with ICE and with what was happening on the borders, that all of this was in an attempt to draw the military home. So is this part of that overall broad narrative where he wants to end these foreign entanglements and bring our military back and to stop this? Is that the reason for the timing, is that they have a timeline, they've got a path, and this is just squarely on that path in their plan?
Okay, if we're to break the charade of this false narrative that's been constructed about the United States major enemy being Russia, one, we need to understand this with regards to what happens to Obama. I don't know that is the chief concern. That's going to be figured out in the future. Now, I do have some ideas what that might look like, but I do think that Trump does have a grudge, and I know that Kash Patel has a grudge against those bureaucrats who were working against him and were working desperately to cover their asses. And the three that are at the top of that list are John Brennan, James Clapper, and Comey. So those three, I don't know that those three have any immunity. Now, when it comes to President Obama, let's go back again to Trump's first office and a conversation that received a lot of attention that he had with Vladimir Putin. And this was a conversation about Stephen Magnitsky. And if you remember who Stephen Magnitsky is, that was a capitalist who had a lot of businesses in Russia, who was thrown out by Vladimir Putin, and he cried foul and was part of the he ran to John McCain and begged for the United States to begin to sanction Russia. Very short-sighted the case of the United States putting their interests, aligning their interests with a hedge fund and one single person, rather than understanding what the broader context of what had occurred in Russia was. But Russia was asking for the United States to return Stephen Magnitsky so that he could be, or I believe it was Browder, to return Browder. Magnitsky was Browder's lawyer, to return, I think it's Bill Browder, to Russia so that he could be tried for crimes in Russia. And Trump said to Putin, well, would you give up Would you give up some of the members of your government? How high is this going to go? And they had a conversation about about uh, about giving up former elected officials. It may actually come to that. That's actually what the UN's International Criminal Court of Justice and International Criminal Court were established to do. But the United States and the Western states who have the outsized power in the UN have refused to give up their officials. But we have, we also have United States citizens who have been summoned to other jurisdictions to face charges of crimes. That may very well happen in the future. I'm not sure. But as far as domestically, I would imagine that Obama is fairly insulated from charges.
So it's his first ring lieutenants that are maybe on the chopping block that don't have immunity. I guess I'm curious if any of these guys got pardons in their
No.
in those last days of Biden's administration when he was using his auto pen.
No, no, the pardons, no, none of them got any pardons. This may, who knows what the calculations are, or even as you mentioned the auto pens, and there are questions regarding Joe Biden. But we haven't even. I don't know if you want to continue with the thread and the narrative of how this coup perpetuated itself, but.
Yeah, go for it. I mean, I think laying out like the full scope of it. So go ahead, do it. Let's hear it, because I think it's important. You're giving us a narrative here, and let's keep going with it. So I'm suspending my skepticism. Let's proceed. I'm not going to keep arguing that this is cover. I'm dubious that it is, but let's see how it plays out. And the other question that I would have is, if it's going the way you think, do you have any predictions for what would happen next? So that's kind of where I'm hoping we can take this in the second half, or the 10 minutes we've got left.
Okay, well, I just want to quickly go over. So we talked about what occurred before with the Democratic National Convention, the pegging of Russia as interfering with the United States election. In October, Obama directed the intelligence community to produce a paper to legitimize that claim by the Democrats. Coming out of the election, he again turned to the intelligence community and said, "I need a paper that says that confirms that Russia was the reason that Trump was elected." And this is going to establish cover for our actions leading into that election. And that paper was given to Donald Trump the day that he took office on January the 6th. Donald Trump then tried to argue, tried to have a discussion to clear his name with those members of the intelligence community. And what that did was to draw out and create a time at which the Democrats mounted a campaign against him, which would lead to the two impeachments. Remember, the first impeachment, or I forget if it was the first or the second, had to do with a call to the Ukrainian president. And the Ukrainian president that call to the Ukrainian president was threatening to withhold American funding to Ukraine that was based on this deep conspiracy about the Russian involvement in American elections. And it gets further, because when we then think about, the Democrats had an expectation that they were going to be in power, and they thought that the actions, the illegal actions of Hunter Biden and Joe Biden were going to retain political cover going forward, and that was not the case. So an eye turned towards Hunter Biden's drug use, prostitution, and bribes that were going on, the big man, and this gets carried on for quite some times. Meanwhile, Kash Patel is part of the Department of Justice investigation into what's going on. He finds he finds information that is incredibly damning for everyone, for the members of the intelligence community, going all the way to Donald Trump. He goes to Devin Nunes of the House. They have the House hearings. Adam Schiff buries the testimony from CrowdStrike that says the DNC emails were not hacked. That was a leak. There was no hack. The yellow cake in Nigeria does not exist. There are no weapons of mass destruction. Russia has not been engaged in that. But by this time, we're 3 years into the Trump presidency, and we're going into the campaign for the upcoming election. And then what do we have? We have Hunter Biden's laptop. We not only do we have Hunter Biden's laptop, but leading into election day for
Wait,
Biden.
go back for a second. Why is Hunter Biden's laptop important in this overall narrative? This was something that for a long time was discredited. They said that didn't exist. Then we found out it did exist. How does it play into this overall story? Because for so long we heard in the media that this wasn't a thing, it didn't exist, blah blah blah, and finally we got it, but that came out so late that it almost was buried, and so to have it come back up again I think is interesting. So tell us why that's important again within the scope of what was going on with Russiagate.
Okay, so short story on Hunter Biden's laptop was that he took his MacBook in to have it fixed at some repair station in I don't know, New Jersey, Maryland. I believe New Jersey. He didn't go back to pick it up. And the guy that he had fixed it began looking at it and found all of these damning pictures of Hunter Biden doing cocaine with prostitutes. And Hunter Biden, mind you, is on the board of Burisma, a gas company in Ukraine. And he has he has no credentials that would lead him towards being on that gas company, except that he was put on it at the time that his father was the vice president of the United States. And there's this narrative that Russia is the one that's interfering in Ukrainian politics, when meanwhile it's Hunter Biden, the unqualified son of the vice president of the United States, who's on a gas board and cavorting with prostitutes and doing drugs, and also taking bribes. And there are emails in there that talk about setting up meetings with the big guy. The big guy ostensibly would be his father, and taking bribes for setting up those meetings. Also on that board, and somebody who doesn't get a lot of attention is Colfer, and Colfer is Mitt Romney's right-hand man. Why Mitt Romney and why Joe Biden? It doesn't have to do with Joe Biden's position as vice president. This gets set up even before then. Mitt Romney and Joe Biden are the Republican and the Democrat who are at the head of the National Security Committee for the Senate of the United States. So if we go back to Dwight Eisenhower and him warning about the military-industrial complex, there was actually a third part. He said that there is a congressional military-industrial complex. And so that military-industrial complex reaches in and is tied inextricably to members of the Senate. Why have we seen Lindsey Graham and Blumenthal running around Ukraine and contravening the foreign policy directives of the President of the United States and ostensibly the wishes of a vast majority of American citizens? Because they now sit at the head of that committee. And so when they are tasked with continuing the wishes of the military-industrial complex, the arms dealers, and those companies who are making money on furthering and honestly, actually, more so, I think more than are just motivated our money, are actually motivated with a view of the world that requires American primacy, American dominance through coercion. So this holds forth. This is why the laptop is important. It gets even more important when, again, we come to the security apparatus of the United States providing cover and lying about. So we have actually the FBI drawn more deeply into this complicity because they lie about. Well, I say they lie. They're dishonest. They say the truth, but I forget what the exact words are, but they basically give Joe Biden license to waive a statement that they've made and say the laptop's not real. The laptop's not real. In one of the last debates he has with Trump going into the election, and then days before the election, 51 spies who lie release a letter that's saying we don't find any veracity in or I think what the letter actually said was that we cannot be sure that the Russians, listen to this, we cannot be sure that the Russians haven't manipulated the information on Hunter Biden's laptop. So they're not saying that it's not Hunter Biden's laptop, and they're not saying that Russia did manipulate the information on it, but they are saying that we cannot be sure that the Russians did not manipulate that data. And that leads into days into the election of Joe Biden. And so then as we also begin to look at Joe Biden's presidency and ask ourselves who was in control during that presidency and what began to occur in America with censorship and with a ramping up of the war and the lies that were put forth with regards to America's involvement in the Ukrainian-Russian conflict, this is incredibly important, and it all ties together in one long thread. And America, wake up! Russia is not our enemy. Our enemy lies within and lies with countries who have demonstrated a history and a capacity to manipulate the politics of the United States.
So if I'm going to bring all that together and tie the threads, because I think I see where this has been going, the enemy is not Russia, the enemy is England?
The enemy is England, and the enemy is broad international companies who see the world in terms of forcing other people into their will and using that force 24/7, and so discounting diplomacy, discounting the democratic wishes and the elected officials that rise up through the democratic process. And when we bring Jeffrey Epstein back into this, yes, he's important. And this is the reason that I say that we should be paying attention to his ties with international arms dealers and people who are not bound to any one nation state's interests. But if we are to begin to attack that power alignment, then we need to start by figuring out which nation states are also being, which nations are being manipulated, and political processes are being contravened, and we need to figure out what the truth is, both in our elections and with our relationships with other countries. Because when I say that England is part of the problem, yes, it's part of the problem, but mainly because it is a host to an intelligence, a subversive intelligence agency that has demonstrated the ability and the intent and actual results in manipulating other countries and their elections. Israel also falls into that, but Israel is yet another colony of England. So we need to get right with Russia. We need to get right with England. We need to call out what we have found the MI6, the intelligence agencies, to have occurred between us and Israel and Syria and the Middle East. We need to let the people of the UK, the people of England know, as Jeremy Corbyn goes into elections there, it's very important that they begin to understand what's actually occurring in Russia. The Germans also need to understand this too, as AfD vies for vies for control in Germany. If we are to avert war, it's not by ramping up our munitions and establishing drafts so we begin to amass massive numbers of soldiers. That's not the way to avoid war. The way to avoid war is to let the truth come out, and whether our politicians and American bureaucrats are stained in the process, we need to have a great again, a great come to Jesus. We need to acknowledge what has occurred in our last elections. You asked earlier what happens to Barack Obama. I don't actually care that much. What I care about is avoiding an ongoing war, and whether that becomes a nuclear war, an ongoing war that is based on falsehoods in our past. We've already seen this happen with Afghanistan and Iraq. Everyone loves to blame Israel for that, but had we had a political process that understood what had occurred with the weapons of mass destruction, and what United States interests were around the world, and what our relationship was with the congressional military industrial complex, we could have avoided it instead of blaming other people for the next 20 years.
A lot to chew on there. We're at time. This was a fascinating journey that you took us on. Definitely going to be watching what happens on the follow-up of what Tulsi Gabbard has revealed here, the revelations of the administration. I'm sure we'll be watching this very closely, and likely this will be a big talking point over the weekend. So we'll be watching for more of that stuff, and we'll see you on next time on FOMO.